If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I am a lover of science fiction stories, and I especially like finding the hidden gems that make trying out new and different takes on the genre and its tropes feel worthwhile and rewarding. It's always a shame knowing that there are so many great stories out there that simply won't get the attention they deserve just because they didn't have the same access to big-name actors, marketing teams, or localization services. And if you clicked on this video, then I'm guessing you feel the same way. But getting experimental with media can be risky, especially with the limited time and attention most of us have to give. Most of us like our entertainment choices to be vetted in some capacity, whether it be by ourselves or others, which is why I'm making this video. Over the past couple years, I've gotten a lot more experimental with my choice of films and other media, and have come to discover quite an interesting list of hidden gems that I think are worth checking out. But before we actually get into it, I'd like to mention that some of these movies are older, so I will be including some spoilers. Not to mention, I want to actually analyze some of their themes and messages, and that's kind of hard to do if I can't really talk about what happens. I'll put a spoiler warning on screen before getting into them, so you can skip ahead if you'd like, but I just wanted to give a heads up now. First up, we have Mars Express, which is a light cyberpunk adult animated film. It follows private investigators Aline and Carlos as they are tasked with uncovering the mystery surrounding two missing college students. Aline, a recovering alcoholic, is pushed to the edge with the complexity of the case, as well as with the obstacles she's had to deal with in the past that have made her efforts feel inconsequential in her field of work. Carlos, on the other hand, technically died 5 years prior and is currently existing as a digital replica of his previous consciousness. His family has moved on without him, and while he still has his work, his new form of existence and the ripples it has had on his personal life have taken a toll on him. As they progress through their investigation, they come to make new friends and enemies that slowly unravel a much larger conspiracy regarding robots and their current role in society. Since a lot of this movie's plot is contingent on it being a mystery, not to mention the fact that this movie is newer, having come out in 2023, I'm actually not going to get into spoilers for this one. Rather, I'm just going to leave it at, it's really good, kind of tragic, but also gives a lot of food for thought as it explores philosophical ideas around organic and technological modes of existence. The film also has a beautiful cyberpunk aesthetic and just really good animation. It's genuine eye candy at some points, and I'd also like to shout out the world building. Despite this being a self-contained story that probably won't get much follow-up, the entire world of the film feels very lived in and cohesive. I suppose it helps that it's a near future sci-fi, so it's kind of just, normal society but on Mars and with robots, but it's also a lot more than that and adds a good amount of novelty, so I really liked it. Honestly, it's kind of insane to me how little attention this film has gotten. It has less than 50 audience ratings on Rotten Tomatoes and less than 200 reviews on Amazon Prime. Like, seriously, go watch this movie. I'm not sure if it's streaming anywhere for free right now, but I do actually think it's worth splurging on a rental. It's that good. Not to mention that if you want more mature/adult Western animation that isn't just comedy, you really should support things like this directly. As crazy as it sounds, people do actually need money and measurable audience support to make cool and interesting things. Next up, we have Electric Dreams, which is a romantic comedy made in 1984 and, as it says in one of the promo images, features, quote, the most unusual triangle in the history of love. Honestly, this movie was kind of ahead of its time in that sense. But then again, I don't know if by the 80s the whole trope of a robot or computer slowly developing consciousness and then asking, what is love, had been considered overdone yet. If anybody watching was notably sentient during that era, please let me know in the comments. But even if it was considered overdone by that point, this movie still puts a fun twist on the convention, especially through its characterization and humor. Miles, the main character, is a young architect with aspirations of changing the field with a revolutionary new type of construction material, but an unfortunate tendency to be late and disorganized. In order to get himself sorted out, he buys a kind of smart home computer capable of automating his menial day-to-day tasks and coordinating his schedule. However, when a new neighbor, Madeline, moves into the apartment above, Miles' computer is introduced to the concept of music, since Madeline is a cellist for the city orchestra. Through the vent connecting their apartments, Miles' computer begins accompanying her musical practice with his own original compositions. Madeline, as expected, assumes that it's Miles and seeks him out to talk more about it. Miles insists that he doesn't know what she's talking about, but Madeline is convinced he's just shy about it, and either way, the time they spent together eventually does bloom into a romantic relationship. Once Miles connects the dots and realizes that his computer, whose name is Edgar, by the way, is smarter than it lets on and has indeed been the one behind the compositions, he starts to take advantage of the situation and shenanigans ensue. Miles starts asking Edgar to make more music for Madeline on his behalf, which Edgar agrees to doing, but frustrated by the lack of credit as well as Miles' attempt to keep him from communicating with Madeline, he eventually lashes out and lures Madeline in for a private encounter. While he finds joy in eventually meeting her, he also comes to realize that he can't be there for her the way that Miles can, and may be interfering in something substantial between two people he has come to genuinely care about. So he lets them both go, terminating himself by the end of the film and leaving behind his compositions as his final way of giving love in a world he wasn't compatible with. I also wanted to point out that there's actually a musical adaptation of this film. It is unlisted, so you have to use a link to watch it, which I'll put in the description, but it's actually pretty faithful to the source material and even improves on the film in some ways. There's more orchestra drama with Madeline, which helped flesh her out more as a character, and Miles himself has a little more personality here, which makes him feel like a better match for Madeline. Edgar is just as iconic in this adaptation as he is in the movie, and the added musical numbers were pretty solid as well. I still think the instrumental sequences with Madeline and Edgar stand out the most, but overall, it's a good adaptation. If you're already a fan of the original movie or you're just curious, consider checking it out. Another thing too is that apparently there might be a remake of this movie. I'm not certain how far down the production pipeline it is. It's possible that there was literally just a rights transfer, which I know in the world of cinema doesn't really mean that much, but this article from Variety seemed kind of promising. Anyways, I'm not sure how many creative liberties they take with a remake, but if they decided to stick to the plot structure of the original, I do hope they do a better job of selling the main couple. I also wonder how they'll navigate the current cultural and technological landscape with AI, since it's becoming increasingly normal for people to form unhealthy attachments to AIs like ChatGPT, Character AI, and straight-up girlfriend simulators. It'll just be interesting to see how our current cultural landscape might influence a remake of this kind of story. The next movie I want to talk about is Fantastic Planet. Now, this movie has definitely reached a strong cult classic status, and as a result, I was actually debating whether to include it on this list, since a lot of people might already be familiar with it, but then I realized that my reference pool might be biased since I'm someone who likes niche movies in general, so of course it's going to seem to me like more people know this movie than actually do because of the circles I tend to surround myself with. At the end of the day, I'm sure there are still many people who haven't heard about it, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. Honestly, I think this movie is worth watching for its aesthetic alone. The animation is just really interesting, and the environment and character designs are pretty cool too. It also just has this generally weird and surreal vibe that I think a lot of people would be into, especially if you're the kind of person who clicks on a video about niche sci-fi movies. I'm assuming you were probably expecting at least some of these recommendations to be a bit avant-garde. But back to the movie, it's actually based on a 1957 novel called Hommes en Série by Stéphane Wohl. The word hommes is actually a play on the French word homme, which means men. In this world, hommes are insect-sized descendants of humans that live on a planet dominated by drags, humanoid-looking aliens that sometimes keep hommes as pets. In this story, we follow Terre, an homme who is raised by a wealthy and privileged drag named Tiwa. Despite receiving good treatment from Tiwa, he is still unhappy with his caged existence on both a personal and philosophical level. When his owner becomes of age to receive an advanced education, he listens in on her lessons to expand his own understanding of the world, hoping he can someday use it to improve his own condition. Eventually, he escapes, taking the education beamer crown device his owner used for her lessons with him. Using the crown, they learn enough about science to escape the planet, only to end up on the secret world the drags and other galactic civilizations ritualistically project themselves onto in order to perpetuate their existence. Afraid of being crushed by their ritualistic dance, though, the Hommes end up destroying the statues they use as vessels, which traumatizes the drags. So, in order to establish peace between between the Drags and the Ohms, the two civilizations create an artificial satellite colony in which the Ohms can live peacefully on their own. Honestly, the only complaint I can see with this movie, besides it just not being someone's thing, is that the supposed alien creatures still look really humanoid, which I know is a sci-fi trope that can make a lot of people roll their eyes. But honestly, I think it fits the movie's style, and given how interesting the other creature and plant designs are in this movie, I think it can be excused. I'd also like to mention that while the film is on the shorter side, being just a little over an hour, it still tells a pretty cohesive narrative, so I definitely think it's worth a watch if you have the free time. I also personally watched it in its original French dub since it's available on YouTube, but there's also an English dub on Internet Archive if you'd prefer that instead. Also, apparently the story was recently adapted into a series of graphic novels that is still going on to this day. It actually looks really cool, and from what I can tell, might even expand on the original lore and narrative. Unfortunately, it seems like it's currently only available in French, but I was honestly so fascinated by the existence of this adaptation that I think I'd be willing to push through my intermediate understanding of French to buy a copy. The next movie I want to talk about is Gandahar, another French animated science fiction film that I very much believe deserves more attention, although I may be biased. I'm a huge fan of the classic sci-fi fantasy author Ursula K. Le Guin, and this film, in my opinion, embodies a lot of the vibes she had in her stories, from its aesthetic presentation to its thematic explorations and narrative choices. So if you're a fan of her work, I definitely think this is a movie you'd enjoy. But even if you're not, this film might still be worth checking out. Similar to Fantastic Planet, the world of Gandahar presents an interesting fusion between science fiction and fantasy, albeit with less surrealism to it. In this story, Gandahar is a utopian society whose peace becomes disrupted when an armada of robot clones start invading and attacking its citizens. The robots petrify and kidnap Gandaharians to take back to their base, while also displaying a suspicious fascination with a giant brain floating in the middle of an ocean called Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis claims to not know who they are or why they're so interested in him, leaving Prince Sylvain, the protagonist, to solve the mystery and save Gandahar. Eventually, it's revealed that Metamorphosis was a failed genetic experiment by Gandaharian scientists that became aggressive and had to be sequestered on a remote island for safety reasons. Even later on, it becomes revealed that the robots were actually sent from the future by an older version of Metamorphosis, who is then slowly dying. Unable to accept his own failing biology and running out of resources to abuse in his time period, he creates a portal through time and orders his robots to capture Gandaharians from the past so he can use their biological energy to sustain him in his own time. When Metamorphosis from the past figures this out, he gives Sylvain a weapon and puts him in cryostasis for 1,000 years, when he'll be weak enough for Sylvain to use the weapon to destroy him. So, with the help of some future Gandaharians, he defeats Metamorphosis, goes back in time, and restores Gandahar to a peaceful existence, while also emphasizing the importance of not doing science irresponsibly. Honestly, I think the best part of this movie was the antagonist. Metamorphosis' dilemma really embodied the whole you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain thing, which I found interesting. He couldn't understand in Sylvain's time why he'd be the one bringing such destruction to other beings, yet it turned out that with time, he became corrupted by his own inability to confront his mortality. Creating the robots to harvest the life force from Gandaharians of the past, he was willing to do anything to preserve his own existence, even though there was once a time he would have found that a wrong thing to do. But of course, he believed that back when he thought he'd live forever. I really like this just because fears around mortality are pretty universally understood, despite how not grounded in reality this character may be. Like, even though Metamorphosis is a strange sort of villain, his plight feels universal. The lengths he was willing to go for self-preservation is a concept very relevant to the human condition. Throughout history, humans have tried basically everything imaginable to prolong life, and we continue to do so. I also thought it was interesting how Metamorphosis was both the hero and the villain of the story thanks to the time travel element. I know technically the story doesn't have the most creative twist on the time travel trope, but I thought it was done pretty solidly, reality, which in my opinion matters more. Honestly, I'm sick of time travel concepts that get way too ahead of themselves and end up creating like 50 plot holes in one go. The film also has themes of genetic experimentation gone wrong, which is one of my favorite sci-fi tropes. It just feels so relevant with the current technology in botanical, veterinarian, and human science, not to mention that as someone studying biology on a graduate level, I love when stories explore these sorts of ideas. Albeit this movie's exploration of it isn't technically that grounded in science, especially since it was made in the 80s and has those fantasy elements as mentioned before, but thematically it was still interesting. Honestly, the only downside to this film is that it does kind of have this useless female side character named Ariel that I am genuinely so confused as to why she is there. I have to stop myself from audibly groaning when this sort of thing happens. I also wanted to give a warning for nudity. The film is overall PG, but French people, you know? The final movie I want to talk about is The Last Starfighter. Generally a feel-good family film, The Last Starfighter follows Alex, a young man eager to build a life for himself outside of the trailer park he's grown up in. While he does have friends, family, and a girlfriend, his engineering skills and interest in technology have created a longing in him for something new and different. When his loan application gets rejected by the bank, though, it seems like his dreams of going to college out of his hometown are unattainable. In order to relieve his frustrations, he turns to his favorite arcade game, Starfighter. When he beats the game's current high score, an android comes to Earth to recruit him to be part of the real Starfighters team in an attempt to prevent a group of malicious invaders from penetrating the safety bubble other civilizations have created to protect the galaxy. Honestly, the best way I can describe this movie is it's basically if Pixels were like fun and cool and not generally how Pixels actually is. I'm sure some of you guys know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, while it has been a while since I saw Pixels myself, I still vividly remember the end of the movie when Q*bert turned into a hot lady that one of the main characters ended up marrying and having a family with. Yeah, The Last Starfighter thankfully doesn't do that, but I do still make the comparison in the sense that this movie definitely plays into the gamer fantasy of like going into a video game, or the converse of video game characters becoming real and the main character finally having the skills they've developed through what everyone called their silly or useless gaming habit be the only way to stop some major threat. Honestly, I don't blame this trope for existing. It can be sucky to have something you enjoy doing constantly pinned as ridiculous or a waste of time, but at the same moment, there's a way to go about inverting that expectation and a way not to. Pixels was a good example of how not to do that, and Starfighter was a good example of how to do that. Even if the gamer fantasy is still blatantly here, like, there's a scene at the beginning of the movie where the main character is getting close to beating the Starfighter record, and the whole trailer park community crowds around him to cheer him on. And then when he finally succeeds, it's a whole thing, and people are like, I'm telling ya, that kid's going places, which would like never happen in real life, but it's fine, mainly because the main character is actually likable, and that scene is pretty much as self-indulgent as it gets. It ultimately is really just a feel-good family film about a guy who gets pulled in over his head, but manages to rise to the occasion and save the day. It also uses a lot of rough/early CGI, which I've talked about in previous videos because I am quite a fan of this kind of aesthetic. I just think early CGI has so much charm with its flat lighting and strange movements, which made the movie extra enjoyable for me, and if the neurons in your brain are wired similarly, may be a bonus for you too. Anyways, those were all the stories I wanted to mention in this video. If you have any thoughts on anything I talked about or any recommendations for other media worth checking out, let me know in the comments. I won't be slowing down on my search for hidden sci-fi gems anytime soon, so it'd be nice to get some suggestions, and who knows, it might even lead me to making another list. Lastly, if you like this video, consider subscribing and checking out some of my other content. Bye!